name's Justin McClure, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're talking about Jamaa Fanaka, a director, part of the L.A. Rebellion, who made some great movies and never, ever got a break.
You probably haven't heard of him, although maybe you've heard of one of his most famous movies. That is 1979's Penitentiary.
Or Penitentiary 2 with Mr. T, who at one point it sounds like he goes to cancer.
Or 1987's Penitentiary 3 from the Cannon Group.
It was very well reviewed in Cult Flicks and Trash Picks. I remember that. They were a big fan of Penitentiary 3.
These movies were substantial independent hits, especially the first one. And Jamaa Fanaka was one of the few black filmmakers making not just substantial hits, but any sort of movie in the late 70s, early 80s. You told me an amazing statistic that in, I think, the year 1980, the only Hollywood movie to have a black lead was Stir Crazy.
Yeah, with Richard Pryor. And he was just like the supporting lead as well.
But, you know, if you only know Jamaa Fanaka from the Penitentiary trilogy, which are exploitation films, they're films about boxing in prison. One of them has Mr. T in it. You may not understand what sort of filmmaker Jamaa Fanaka was or could have been. And before we go back and explore who he is, the other thing that you may know Jamaa Fanaka for is his 1975 film Welcome Home, Brother Charles, which is famous for being a movie about a black man with a giant 4-foot penis that kills and strangles people.
Whoa, 4 foot? More like 14 feet. It goes across the room and strangles that guy.
You're right. I mean, look.
That's a big difference in semantics.
I mean, look, I'm just so used to, having an enormous dick that sometimes I lowballed it a little bit, you know?
I mean, Fanaka, what's fascinating about him is that he was part of the L.A. Rebellion, but he's often left outside of it when people talk about it. And, before we talk about his history, we should talk about the L.A. Rebellion a little bit.
Because I think this episode, I mean, it sounds like we're having fun here. It sounds like we're laughing, watching goofy exploitation films. But this week was a little bit sad for me because this feels like a week of talent unrealized, of institutional racism, of the sorts of stories and the styles of storytelling that do not go recognized.
The thing about the L.A. Rebellion, which is a group of filmmakers, black filmmakers, that came out of film schools around 1967.
Particularly UCLA.
Is that all of these filmmakers usually made 1 or 2 films, and then that got no distribution and they dropped off the map. It's not like the French New Wave where all these filmmakers flourished and got to do more and more stuff. No, this is like a group of people that, for example, Julie Dash, she didn't get to make her first, well-distributed feature film until the early 90s.
Julie Dash and Charles Burnett, the director of Killer of Sheep, are probably the best-known filmmakers to come out of the L.A. Rebellion. And for those who don't know what the L.A. Rebellion was, in the late 1960s, affirmative action started to have some impact on film schools. And there was this whole wave of black filmmakers who were finally able to go to UCLA and make movies. Jamaa Fanaka was one of them. He was unusual compared to some of the other ones because the other ones were very adversarial and very ideologically opposed to Hollywood.
Yeah, they kind of echoed the neo-realist ideas of places like Italy, is that they wanted to tell films from the streets that didn't fit those Hollywood molds.
Whereas Fanaka, while certainly owing something to the Italian neo-realist tradition, wanted to find a way to bridge the gap between that and mainstream commercial filmmaking.
He just wanted to be a filmmaker, one that could work regularly and tell his stories on screen. I mean, he didn't always want to be a director. He kind of bounced around in life. He was in the army. He was in jail for a year, and he says that he was on his way to rob a bank when he saw a poster advertising a program that would allow you to go into the UCLA Film School. And even to get into that, he had to go do a different college to be able to qualify to enter the program. And when he did, oh man, all he wanted to do was make films.
We've been talking about movies about boxing in prison, about Mr. T, about a big killer penises. But again, don't want to give you the wrong idea of Jamaa Fanaka. In UCLA, he made two movies that are it's crazy that They're both released by Vinegar Syndrome, who specializes in exploitation movies. When I first saw Welcome Home, Brother Charles, I was a little frankly disappointed the first time I saw it because it was totally not what I was expecting.
Well, I mean, even the second one, Emma Ray, had a different title when it came out. It was
Black Sister's Revenge,
which is an insane title for this movie.
And Welcome Home, Brother Charles also went by the title of Soul Vengeance because, you know, the history of African-American filmmaking. In the silent era, you had filmmakers like Oscar Micheaux, who were able to, you know, make independent films for the circuit of black theaters, particularly in the Deep South. And they never played outside of those theaters, but he was able to go from town to town and make a meager living off of it. And then once that dried up in the early sound era, there were basically no African-American filmmakers until the blaxploitation wave of the late 60s, early 70s. Melvin Van Peebles.
Yeah, Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song.
Ossie Davis, and then
that was kind of swallowed by Hollywood, and it was white filmmakers that turned around and started to tell those stories in the most exploitative ways that they could. I mean, Fanaka hated the label blaxploitation because that kind of denoted something lesser to him than the films that he was making.
By about 1975, when he was making these movies, the blaxploitation boom had fizzled out. And again, there were basically no black movies being made, at least in a sort of mainstream way, until, I don't know, the late 80s, until kind of Spike Lee.
Yeah, pretty much until Spike Lee, any kind of filmmaker who worked with regularity.
Yeah.
I mean, so his first film, Welcome Home, Brother Charles, came out of the fact that he had a project that had to be like a 5-minute sound film in school, and he turned around and decided, you know what, let's make it feature length.
This is the story of Charles, who's a pimp and a drug dealer in Compton, who's framed of murder by a corrupt white cop who catches him sleeping with his wife, which, of course, for a corrupt white cop is the ultimate indignity.
So what does he do? He castrates the man.
Yes, he does that on the way to framing him for murder. Castrates him. Charles goes to prison, and the scene where he's in prison is quite extraordinary. It's represented through a number of black and white stills and sort of an intense soundscape. He comes out of prison, professes to be a reformed man, wants to get on the straight and narrow, but he also wants to avenge his both literal and symbolic castration. I mean, the symbolism is pretty heavy here.
I mean, he does get his penis reattached, but something went right, because now he can hypnotize white women and make love to them and also use it to kill the people that wronged him. Now, I say that, and if you put that on the back of the box, young Will, that's why he was disappointed, because that is not the core of the movie. For about like an hour and 10 minutes, it's mostly Charles trying to reintegrate into society, seeing how things have moved on in the 3 years that he was gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's much more of a kind of, I mean, this has always been marketed as a blaxploitation movie. I think one of the reasons why it was marketed as a blaxploitation movie in the mid-70s in particular is it's like the mostly white people who released movies didn't know how else to market a black-themed movie. And this one has certain elements of a blaxploitation movie. It's has heavy sexual content. It's, you know, criminals and cops and drug dealers and pimps.
And I have to admit, it does feel like a short film they decided to make feature length. So this could have been like 10 minutes long, and you would have gotten the main beats of the story. But what Fanaka brings to it is that kind of lived-in sense. There's a lot of like shot from moving cars or real people that you get to see.
Yeah, I mean, I found this one a bit of a chore to get through, but what's good about Fanaka in all of his movies is that, like you say, it's that lived-in feel. He's shooting documentary style in Compton and South Central LA, often using non-professional actors, often using just like people on the street. And the movies have a bit of a time capsule quality, as great exploitation movies often do.
And he got Welcome Home, Brother Charles distribution with the same distributor that did Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song.
Okay.
And they renamed it Soul Vengeance and put it out. But because he's an independent filmmaker, he obviously was not offered contracts right there. Wait, I say independent filmmaker, I mean black filmmaker.
Yeah. Well, his next one, which was also a student film, MMA, also known as Black Sister's Revenge. I mean, this has also typically been marketed as an exploitation movie, and it is a bonus feature on the Vinegar Syndrome Blu-ray.
Let's be honest, this should have been the main film, and Welcome Home, Brother Charles should have been the bonus film.
But, I mean, this one, I guess, is harder to market than Welcome Home, Brother Charles, because it doesn't have somebody with a giant killer penis in it.
That's right.
It's, again, often marketed as a blaxploitation movie, but really it's a rambling character study about MMA, played by a UCLA student named Jerry Hayes, who gives
her only role.
Extraordinary performance. Should have led to bigger things. She plays a young Southern woman who comes to L.A., where her family home is, after her mother dies. She goes to live with her aunt and uncle and a whole mess of cousins.
And she's presented from the get-go as kind of like a hayseed, like, oh, the big city, like, are you going to be able to handle what goes on around here? But quickly she just proves herself that, yeah, I'm from the country, and we have to deal with some really bad stuff there. She beats somebody up right from the get-go who kind of gets in her face, and already gains the trust of this community and her family, and starts making friends.
The family sort of, I mean, they're busy. They sort of pawn her off on this local tough guy, a bit of a hoodlum, bit of a drug dealer, something of a leader in the community, and she becomes his girlfriend. He gets arrested, thrown in jail. She has to get bail money to get him out. Starts a car wash, which,
gets shut down because people don't like non-whites doing any kind of business.
Quickly, it becomes a movie, you realize, about failure of all the systems,
But the fact that it is so sprawling and has such a magnetic, changing performance in the center that is not only learning stuff, but also revealing itself, I think is why it works so well. I mean, there's some rambling asides in this movie as well, like all of Fanaka's pictures have, but I think that this one, they feel more important than anywhere else, mostly because it's all kind of centered by Jerry Hayes' performance as MMA, who not only is someone that is proactive in the film, but she's also learning about these injustices and how she can react to them.
Now, this one doesn't feel like an exploitation movie. Penitentiary does. Do you know, how did he get to Penitentiary?
So I think that after MMA wasn't a big success for him, he made his money back, and by that I mean his parents' money. The first 4 films that he made, Welcome Home, Brother Charles, MMA, Penitentiary, and Penitentiary 2, he could not get any outside funding for it, so it was his parents had to put up their life savings each time pay for the movies. And that's how Penitentiary came about. And I think Penitentiary...
Even Penitentiary 2?
Even Penitentiary 2. No one would give him money. Wow. And Penitentiary was a massive hit. In the year it came out, it was the biggest independent film ever. It made back $74 to each dollar put into making the movie. That is a massive return that I'm sure he saw almost none of because the distributor probably pocketed it all.
Again, it's interesting what sorts of independent filmmakers get to go on to big careers, because I'm sure there are a lot of people in Hollywood who would look at something like Welcome Home, Brother Charles, or MMA, or even Penitentiary, and say, well, this is rough and slipshod and also a little déclassé. Somebody like Kevin Smith can make Clerks.
Yeah, and people are like, yes, it's a look into a different side of life that we don't usually see.
Yeah, the emergence of a fresh and distinctive voice.
As opposed to MMA, which, watching it, I'm like, this should have been Fanaka's, like, Mean Streets. Yeah. Like, he should have gotten the same attention that somebody like Scorsese did, who then got to make Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. And nope, that didn't happen. Nobody cared. It was just treated as a blaxploitation film and dismissed.
And Penitentiary, I'm sure, was just basically not seen by the important people.
No, and if it was, it got terrible reviews. I mean, it got 1 star, you pointed out, in Leonard Maltin's movie guide, right?
Well, Penitentiary 2 did. And it's Penitentiary 2. Well, okay, Penitentiary is the first one, and it's a very muscular and sweaty and bloody movie full of big lubed up bodies and mouths with not a lot of teeth in them. Just a real, like...
But there's a handsome man at the center, Leon Isaac Kennedy, who plays Too Sweet, a guy framed pretty much and thrown into jail. And I should point out, at this point, Fanaka was still technically a student, and he stayed a student just so he could use the cameras and the studio set. And so that's how this movie was made.
And Too Sweet realizes quickly that boxing is not only his way out of prison, potentially, because there's a very active boxing league in the prison. Everybody supports it. Everybody's happy about it. But this is also his way to, I guess, self-actualize, and his way to pull himself up by his bootstraps, if you will.
Mm-hmm. I mean, these penitentiary films, and we can essentially talk about them as like one nebulous thing, because they're not that different from each other. Did you watch the third one?
I did not get a chance to watch the third one. I saw two.
The third one is probably the one that's the most different, the most cartoony, almost in Zucker territory, because he had more money behind him and he was trying different things.
I was kind of shocked by the difference in tone between the first and second one, because the first one still feels like, I mean, it basically feels like kind of a Rocky ripoff.
Yeah, it's gritty, and you can also feel the kind of almost Poverty Row settings, like, oh, we made this school to look like a prison.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like kind of grime and sweat and filth. Like it feels lived in that sort of Fanaka way.
Penitentiary 2 barely takes place in Penitentiary.
Yeah, it starts with him on the outside. He returns home to his girlfriend. She is quickly, I'm sorry to say, raped and murdered. By
Ernie Hudson.
That's right, the Ghostbuster himself. And Too Sweet gets back into boxing for his revenge, basically.
It's weird because he gets back into boxing just to prove that he can do something with his life, kind of unrelated to his girlfriend.
Yeah, it's a little strange. And the big final showdown... by the way, before we go to the final showdown, Mr. T is in the movie, basically playing like the Carl Weathers role in Rocky 3.
Yes, he is.
But yeah.
He's also dressed like a sultan at one point and has like a genie lamp that he rubs. This film can get very silly.
And I mean, there's a whole cavalcade of bizarre supporting characters, including... What's the name of the guy? The little person from Bad Santa?
Oh,
Tony. What's his name?
I don't remember his name.
He's in it.
A little person would also appear in the third one, where his main villain is like a mad dog boxer called Midnight Thud, who at one point flies around the room while he's fighting him.
Something I liked about the final showdown in the prison, because they have to justify having the word penitentiary in the title. So we're back in the walls that shaped him. The audience is full of like characters we remember from Penitentiary 1.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the family's back, you know? And then the end credits play to basically everybody like...
freeze frame in front of the camera?
Everybody in a group shot. Yeah. And that's when the movie... Basically, the end credits are when the movie kind of clicked into focus for me, where it's like, okay, Penitentiary 2 is basically a party.
Well, the thing about the Penitentiary films is it feels kind of at odds with what Fanaka had done before, like MMA or Welcome Home, Brother Charles, is that they're kind of in a genre structure that he doesn't seem to have any interest in following. Like, some of the boxing matches are just kind of tossed off. It's like, I guess we have to have a climax, so here you go.
Tonally, part 2 is kind of all over the place. I mean, it has that brutal rape scene.
Which goes on forever.
I mean, like, so many movies had that, like that kind of Death Wish 2 shit.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's that. There's some rather slapsticky, over-the-top comedy, and, earnest sports movie stuff.
There's the same thing that happens in Penitentiary 1 and 2, which is that inmates really want to have sex while the boxing match is going on, so you can intercut between Leon Isaac Kennedy fighting and, this guy just wants to get laid.
Yeah. I imagine Fanaka probably wanted to do things other than Penitentiary 3.
Yeah, but I think that's all that people would give him any money for, and people said, that's the only thing you can get distribution for. He wanted to make this movie called Street Wars for a long time, and he did later on in his career. But after Penitentiary 2, he just wanted to direct television, and he got into the DGA, one of the few black directors that was given that chance, and he could get no jobs, which is a little bit baffling when you look at how big a hit Penitentiary 1 was. If any other white filmmaker made a movie that made that much money, people would be knocking down his door to make more movies.
Yeah.
But instead, no jobs, and he sued. I'm not sure who he sued. I think it was kind of like a general lawsuit, mostly as a provocation that these industries were racist and that's why he wasn't getting jobs. I think that some of the studios said, oh, it's because he was too difficult or out there. But of course they would say that.
Yeah.
I mean, oh yeah, because all white filmmakers, they're great and they have no problems or no attitude.
Yeah. So he died in 2012 and it had been well over a decade since his previous film.
Yeah, 1989 Street Wars was his last one, which I did get to watch and was interesting in that his style had obviously evolved. He had thought a lot about it. It's kind of Top Gun-ish and a precursor to stuff like Menace to Society and New Jack City, which is about like crack dealers, and one of them decides, we'll take to the skies in these little planes to take over the city, hence the Street Wars and Star Wars parody font.
And the L.A. Rebellion is something that I feel like it only came into focus for scholars long after it had happened. There was nobody who was sort of writing about it at the time.
Well, none of the films got any distribution. Yeah. Like Killer of Sheep was a famously unavailable film.
Daughters of the Dust had a big revival recently.
So all these filmmakers, they made pictures that people just dismissed mostly because they were black filmmakers, didn't give a chance, and then they couldn't really work that. I mean, Charles Burnett struggled for a long time. A lot of these filmmakers worked in television here or there.
By the way, Charles Burnett was a camera operator on Welcome Home, Brother Charles.
Yes, he was. Charles Burnett was kind of like a cinematographer who would work on a bunch of projects. So they were helping each other, but it never led to anything, which is the biggest bummer.
So, I mean, it feels unfortunate to frame Jamaa Fanaka largely in terms of, it's like I'm framing him in terms of failure here, because looking at his filmography, it looks like there are the first two, and then there's Penitentiary.
Oh, people love the Penitentiary films.
Yeah.
So he did have his cult there.
Yeah.
But I just wish you could have seen what else he could have done, and nobody gave him any opportunity to do so.
But check out MMA.
Yeah, I would definitely check out MMA. And if you're checking that out, you're getting Welcome Home, Brother Charles, because they're both on the same disc.
Why not check that? And fuck it, watch the Penitentiary movies.
Watch them. Yeah, you know what? Order from Vinegar Syndrome. This episode is not brought to you by them. It should be. Yeah. And order all the discs that we just mentioned, because why not? Penitentiary 3, still not available on DVD.
What a shame.
It's one of those canon films from late in the game, so the rights are probably all mangled and nobody knows who has the master for it. We interrupt your regular scheduled programming to thank some new Patreon subscribers, like Noah Hacker, John Furter, Mert, and another John. Thank you so much for becoming subscribers. As I say every week, we could not keep doing this without you. If you as well would like to become a subscriber, you can check out our 150 plus episode back catalog of Patreon episodes, each one over 20 minutes, about a little bit more esoteric riffing type subjects. You can do so by going to patreon.com/theimportantcinemaclub. And if you haven't yet, we would really appreciate it if you went on Apple Podcast and rated and reviewed the show. I was looking at the stats recently, and the highest we've ever been in the United States TV and film podcasting chart is on February 8th, 2020. We were 159th. So if you could help us get even higher by rating, reviewing us, sharing the podcast with everybody you know, it would be very helpful. And if you want to hear from me and Will on day-to-day basis, Will Sloan on Twitter is at Will Sloan ESQ, and I'm at DeCloux, DECLOUX, and the letter J. And now, back to your regular scheduled programming.
Do we have any letters this week?
We do have letters. As per usual, you can send us questions, comments at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. It goes, "Hello, Justin and Will. Have you ever experienced a case of music reuse in film? I was watching 48 Hours and was struck by how its steel drum and synth-heavy soundtrack was nearly identical to that of Commando, a beloved film of mine. Turns out it was the same composer on both films. I believe that's James Horner, who wrote both scores, who would famously recycle his music all the time. But it got me thinking, are there any instances that stand out to you of copy-paste composing? I know that Will has expressed his distaste for the repetitive work of John Williams in the past. You came out against John Williams at some point?
That sounds like something I'd say.
Yeah, I couldn't remember you saying that on this podcast.
You know what? I don't know if it's distaste so much as I was just making a humorous observation that all of his scores sound the same. But, some of them I like.
Danny Elfman, Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Danny Elfman. La 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 la.
And that many of the films you covered in the Jernate Arkin Turkish film episode straight up used copyrighted tracks from more famous movies. But are there any other instances of music reuse in films that stand out to you? Keep up the great work, Zenik.
Yeah, I remember seeing The Artist all those many years ago.
Vertigo.
I remember there was that moment when some very familiar music started playing, and I was trying to figure out what the hell is that? I've heard that. That's not from this movie. And yeah, it's Vertigo.
But it's always fun when you hear music like from somewhere else, usually in a cheap movie, because that's why they would recycle it.
Well, that's why it felt so strange in The Artist. You know, you're not used to hearing like the same music from another big movie in a big movie. But yeah, I mean, I love watching a Turkish ripoff movie and hearing, you know,
Blade Runner or John Williams.
Or John Williams, yeah, hearing the Indiana Jones theme when it should be a Superman movie, you know.
And Poverty Row would always use like public domain tracks all the time. Oh, a movie that I don't think we ever talked about on this podcast, but we showed at the Laser Blast Film Society, Furious, which is an independent. Did you see that one?
Yeah,
I did. Martial arts film. The music in that is just like a needle drop of like a Russian orchestra, not synced up to the movie, and it just plays throughout.
The Bride of Frankenstein music plays in just a ton of the either lesser Universal horror movies, or I think they sold it to like the Phantom Creeps has the Bride of Frankenstein score, or also King Kong vs. Godzilla, the US version has the Creature from the Black Lagoon score.
Right. I mean, classical music is often considered just free game for any producers making a very low budget movie, and Hong Kong was also famous for recycling music, mostly because they were like, nobody will notice. There's like some Western themes that show up a lot in Shaw Brothers movies. The Killer, John Woo's The Killer, has music from Red Heat in it.
Yeah, or, you know, some of Sean Costello's porn films. It's like, I basically associate the Thief soundtrack, the Tangerine Dream soundtrack, more with Sean Costello than I do with Michael Mann.
So I think that me and Will are coming out pro.
Yes, I like it when cheap movies appropriate music, but the only downside is it's hard to license that when you then want to put it out on DVD.
Yeah, it makes it a big problem. I mean, unless, you know, there's so many DVDs being put out now, maybe they'll just come and go. Completely unrelated, I'm putting out Turkish films on Blu-ray through the Gold Ninja Video label.
Excellent. And what movie are you putting out?
Death Warrior, which we talked about at length on our Junaid Arkin episode.
And folks, I think if you watch one Turkish ripoff movie, make it this one.
And if you get this disc, you may have yourself a little bit of a Turkish film festival, because included with it, you not only get Death Warrior, you also got the film that Death Warrior cannibalized to make itself, Holy Sword, which is also a prequel to Death Warrior. You get another Junaid Arkin film, The Biggest Punch, which is a great title. It's kind of his take on like James Bondian movies. And you may get another film somewhere hidden on the disc. Who knows?
And I assume a whole bunch of your special features.
Yeah, I did like a video essay, which I'm going to be honest, they're so hard to do because I have to like write it and then I have to read it, edit it to make sure that it's comprehensive, and then put clips throughout it.
I thought the one you did on the Thundering Mantis disc was really good.
Yep, and it's another one like that for Turkish cinema that you can find exclusively. It's like a little, I call them like introductions, because it's just, this is what you need to know about it, and then, you know, watch the other movies, explore more.
Happy to say you and I are going to be working on another Blu-ray pretty soon.
Yep, but we won't say what it is yet. I'm very excited.
Hey, speaking of Blu-ray news, a few weeks ago on this podcast, we mentioned that Fist of Fear Touch of Death is being put out on a special edition Blu-ray, totally remastered, beautiful new.
And we begged.
Features. We were like, how can we get involved with this? Like,
and we emailed them, and they were like, "Oh, thank you for your interest. You know, hope you buy it. We'll send you screeners." And we're like, "Oh, okay. I guess we're not going to be doing anything for it."
You know, that's fine. It's nice to be nominated.
We weren't even nominated.
Yeah, but
they reached out and were like, "Hey, could you guys write liner notes for it?" And we're like, "Will we?"
Fuck yes. So. Yes, we are involved in the new restored Blu-ray release of Fist of Fear Touch of Death. We wrote liner notes for it. But aside from that,
I think this is like the first big special edition that the Film Detective has ever done.
Yeah, they have a whole new documentary where they've got interviews with Fred Williamson.
Insane. Probably spent more time doing these interviews than he was in the movie.
Yeah.
It's him and Ron Van Cleef being interviewed together.
That's right. Plus the whole creative team behind the movie, Terry Levine from Aquarius Films, and Fist of Fear Touch of Death. We've talked about it before.
It's been on a Gold Ninja video release. It's the first one.
That's out of print, though, so it won't be... And listen, if you have that first Gold Ninja video release, you should still buy this new one. one because
remastered,
and the Fist of Fury, Touch of Death is an incredible film. It's one of the wildest Bruceploitation movies. You'll look at it and be like, how did they have the chutzpah to release this movie?
Yeah. I love that they're like being interviewed about it now as well, because they were like, one of the reasons that we put it on that #1 long out of print Blu-ray is that the joke was no one would put this as a special edition. Everyone's forgotten this movie. It doesn't matter. I think we say that in the introduction, but here you go. A whole new special edition of it.
And it just means so much to me that we're involved in this.
Yeah, and it's a very limited edition, supposedly. They made like 1,000 copies or something like that, so pick it up. It'll be worth it.
Yeah, it's on the Film Detective website. I believe US Amazon also has it.
I think Film Detective is going more in that direction, because they also did a special edition, now that I think of it. They did EGA. They released a special edition of that in conjunction with Mystery Science Theater 3000. So more of that, because people don't know the Film Detective, they take kind of public domain-ish films and they do new scans and they would put them out on DVD and Blu-ray. And now it seems that they're going into the kind of like boutique special edition market. And I have to say, all the power to them, because I'll be there.
Yeah.
So next week, Will, what are we doing? Oh, and people can buy that disc that we mentioned way before at goldninjavideo.com. Limited edition, 200 copies, so make sure to get one now.
Get the whole Golden Ninja library. I have the whole Golden Ninja library.
Well, you can't get them all because some of them are out of print. No more Wolf Devil directors. They're gone.
I'm very sorry to hear that. Yep. Everybody who got that is in for a treat.
I mean, they're in for a week of movies. I did a long video essay on that one as well about Pearl Chang, so...
Well, next week on the podcast, we're talking about maybe the greatest animator who ever lived.
I would say yes. And I would say...
better than Walt Disney.
Yeah. The most influential animator as well. The things that he did were kind of just absorbed into pop culture and reuse of the template of just what a cartoon is.
Like, when you think of a wolf, who do you think of?
Yep.
You think of Tex Avery.
Yep, that's it. Tex Avery, the guy who basically, created the idea of like animated animals doing a bunch of crazy stuff. He's the one who gave Bugs Bunny his early personality before Chuck Jones came in.
Yeah, I mean, okay, talk about influential animators. This guy made Bugs Bunny.
He did, and he did like Porky Pig.
And that's not even the best thing he did.
No, and we're talking about him. If people want to like bone up before they listen to the episode, Warner Archive just put out the Tex Avery Screwball Classics Volume 1. And the thing about Tex Avery is that he has never gotten any proper like respect as an animator on home video. Like all the cartoons that are on this, including Little Red Riding Hood, had only been available in like really crummy transfers that were done in the 90s.
Yeah.
And they went back and they found like inner positives and did new scans, and these just look beautiful. I already watched them all. I just sat down and I watched them all, so I'm really excited to dive deeper into his filmography and just talk about how important he is.
I can't wait.
All right, so until next week, my name's Justin Clue.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening. On a serious note, some people may be trapped at home soon, or maybe even, unfortunately, getting sick, which made me think of like, I was sick a lot as a child. I remember kind of like hugging the humidifier, that hot air blowing into my face.
You're constantly like licking subway poles.
That's right. Those licking the subway poles gave me those ear infections. And I remember the greatest thing of staying home and being sick is you could watch whatever you wanted on television. Watch movies until the cows came home or until you got better.
Yeah, that was always great in theory to me, but the problem is if you've got like the flu or you got a really bad cold.
Feel terrible.
Yeah, and sometimes my attention span is not great when I have the flu.
I remember sitting just feverishly watching Grease and it feel like going on forever.
I remember having the flu recently and just sitting and like listening to a lot of directors' commentaries because that's like all I couldn't actually watch movies.
Would you just like fall asleep while you're listening to them?
Oh yeah, totally.
But as a kid or even now, like what would you throw on to pass the time as you're laying in bed? Because you can't just stare and be left with your thoughts. You'll go crazy.
Oh yeah, well,
Godzilla movies.
Godzilla movies are good, or like Monty Python, or something like that.
So things that are familiar to you.
Things that are familiar for sure. Or actually sometimes I remember when I had my wisdom teeth taken out, just like watching all the movies on my hard drive while I was bleeding everywhere.
Wait, did you have a bit bad wisdom teeth period after you got them taken out? To me, it was nothing. That was just on top of the world.
Oh my god, the worst experience of my life. So I don't think the sedative they give me like had any effect.
So you don't remember being knocked out?
No, I wasn't knocked out. Like, the dentist, like, basically, I was wide awake.
Wait, did you go to, like, budget tooth removals R Us?
They put something in my mouth, but I was wide awake, and the dentist just drilled basically straight into my wisdom teeth, and I was just like,
what was going on? This is how my wisdom teeth were taken out. They put an IV in my arm, and they said, you know, you're going to pass out, and we're going to start this. And I went, oh, yeah, you know, whatever. And then I woke up in the chair in the other room.
Oh, man.
And my girlfriend at the time said I walked over, and I was, like, kind of conscious when that was happening, but I had no memory of it. Didn't hurt. And I just went home and just spent the rest of the time.
I remember to this day having a drill go straight into my teeth.
Is it safe? Wait, could you talk? Like, were you just frozen? Were you like, I have no mouth, but I'm a scream?
I was screaming, and I don't know why.
And the dentist just kept going?
Yeah.
He wasn't like,
well,
where were you?
I mean,
the Canadian health system, just like the barbarian invasions.
No, in Canada, we don't have
dental
universal health for dental. But
that's right. Or eye work, which seems kind of essential.
Yeah, so my most vivid memory was watching James Toback's When Will I Be Loved on my laptop during that.
James Toback!
Remember James Toback? Yeah.
I remember recently picking up Projections, a book series that I love, and going, oh, I don't have this one, and looking who wrote the diary, and it was James Toback. I'm like, back on the shelf you go!
Yeah, that fucker.
So, you know what? At least it won't be as bad as having your wisdom, which sounds like a horrifying... Wait, did this happen recently?
This happened 10 years ago.
Oh, okay. So...
Almost exactly 10 years ago.
You are scaring anyone that haven't had their wisdom teeth removed.
Well, I'm telling you, if your doctor tells you to get it out, you should have it out. But
so, wait, they gave you no sedative? Like,
they gave me a sedative, but I think they must have put it in the wrong spot.
No, but like to knock you out.
I was not knocked out.
Okay.
I think he put it in to like
just to numb your teeth.
Just to numb my teeth. Yeah.
Like you're like in the budget dental hut at this point.
Yeah. Well, and now I know. I guess at the time I just thought that was
how it's supposed to be done.
It was done, and of course it hurts. Your wisdom teeth are being taken out.
Oh, this has been a harrowing post-episode discussion.
Actually, I'm like shaking thinking about it. It was so awful.
Is it safe?